Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
Welcome to the Center for the Study of World Religions. My name is Charles Tang. I have the privilege of serving as the director here. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I know it's a very busy time of year, and thank you for coming out for the Center's final annual lecture of the academic year, the Hackett Lecture in Global Christianity. Before inviting Professor Lian to this podium, I want to acknowledge and thank a number of colleagues who helped make this event possible, helped make all our events possible, in fact. First of all, and always, the wonderful team here at the CSWR, Gosha, Bashwar, Lori, and Sarah, with whom I have the pleasure of working every week. I'd also like to thank our resident advisors, Keith and Nasreen, for helping out with this evening's event. We're honored that Professor Shi Lian accepted our invitation to deliver the Hackett Lecture. Professor Lian is one of 2 Yang visiting scholars in world Christianity at Harvard Divinity School this year, along with Professor Ludovic Lado, who I'm also grateful to meet this evening. Thank you, Professor, for joining us. So we're celebrating a couple things this evening. First, the Center's annual Hackett Lecture, established by my predecessor, Frank Clooney, with the generous gift of alumnus Jim Hackett, MTS 16. Good timing, Frank. I just was thanking you. Were you just waiting in the hallway until I called your name? And second, of course, we're celebrating the Yang Visiting Scholars Program, which I believe is now in its 4th year, and the contributions these scholars have made to our curriculum and our community. A few brief words about Professor Lian. He is the David C. Steinmetz Distinguished Professor of World Christianity at Duke Divinity School, and he is the author of 3 important books. The Conversion of Missionaries, Liberalism in American Protestant Missions in China from 1907 to 1932. That was published in 1997. In 2010, he published Redeemed by Fire, The Rise of Popular Christianity in Modern China. And in 2018, he published Blood Letters, The Untold Story of Lin Zhao, a martyr in Mao's China. He's also the co-editor of the forthcoming volume, Highland Christianity, Modern Transformations of the China-Southeast Asia Borderlands. I would just direct your attention very briefly to some upcoming events at the center. If you're interested, we have 2 events as part of our Transcendentalism initiative coming up on April 2nd and 3rd, and then a new translation of it's not the Conference of the Birds. Shola Volpa, if you may know, has translated Attar's Conference of the Birds, and I believe this is her new translation of Rumi that we are showcasing. That will be wonderful. All of these will be happening right here in this room. Actually, that's not true. Forgive me. The Thoreau documentary will be at the Carpenter Center for Visual Arts in Harvard Yard. Thank you all again so much for coming. Professor Lian's topic this evening is The Light from the Other Shore, the Rise of Public Christianity in Contemporary China. Please join me in welcoming Professor Lian.
Thank you, Professor Stan, for your kind introduction, and thank you all for coming. Also, I understand that people joining us online. Also, thank you for those joining us online. It's been a privilege to spend a year here at Harvard Divinity as one of the XD and Nancy Young scholars, and it's an honor to be invited to give this talk tonight. What I hope to present here this evening is a snapshot of a historic transformation of China in our time. Pardon me, I've lost a little bit of my voice after teaching this afternoon. a transformation of China in our time in which Christianity entered the public sphere to reshape political, social, as well as cultural and artistic imaginations. This new development, particularly the search for justice and democracy, inspired by the Christian faith, particularly it may have broader implications for our understanding of the Christianity of global South and East. The similarity between the struggles of some of the individuals that I will introduce and those of well-known figures such as Albert Luthuli of South Africa, Janani Luwon of Uganda, and Oscar Romero of El Salvador invites considerations of the shared public spirit in world Christianity, which points to the continuity, not just rupture, between Western and non-Western expressions of the Christian faith. But this evening, I will simply tell a China story. For more than a quarter century after the communists came to power in China in 1949, Christianity endured the repression and abuse of a triumphant atheist state. Beginning in the 1950s, the state dominated churches under the control of the Three Self Patriotic Committee for the Protestants and the Catholic Patriotic Association, respectively, dutifully mouthed the propaganda lines of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, as they struggled to retain the sufferance of Mao's regime. That was their only public presence in a steadily diminishing space. After 1958, and especially during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976, in zealous parts of the country, such as coastal Wenzhou, there were official campaigns to exterminate the Christian religion and rid entire regions of churches, clergy, and Bibles. The only Christianity that survived during the Mao era was underground, isolated, otherworldly, and privatized, with one exception. Lin Zhao, a young Christian dissident, poet, and journalist, imprisoned in 1960 as a counter-revolutionary, carried on an unlikely open opposition to what she called the tyranny and slavery of communism until her execution in 1968. Behind bars, she produced biting political essays and elegant poems inked with her own blood. For her, defending human freedom and dignity and denouncing the injustice and cruelty of Mao's revolution was adhering to, quote, the political line of Christ, unquote. As far as we know, hers was the lone sustained prophetic voice at the time, not just among Chinese Christians, but among all Chinese. The late Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo called her the only voice of freedom left for contemporary China. For Lin Zhao, religious faith and democratic convictions were inseparable, as were her dreams of personal freedom and of the birth of a free China. Quote, shattered jade is what I will to be, offered to China as a sacrifice, unquote. She wrote in one poem, as we shall see, the coming of Christianity into the contemporary public space will be characterized by the same melding of Christian patriotism with a faith-inspired search for individual freedom. The historic rise of public Christianity since the 1980s was helped by the broader so-called Christianity fever in the post-Mao China era. Churches and informal meeting places sprang up in the last 2 decades of the 20th century at the rate of about 5 new congregations per day in the aftermath of the punctured illusions of Maoist utopia. Then came the Tiananmen democracy movement of 1989, when the bullets and tanks of the People's Liberation Army ended the lives and dreams of thousands of unarmed pro-democracy citizens and pulverized the last remaining beliefs in communism. Christianity, particularly in its Protestant form, became a leading solution to the crisis of belief in a post-Tiananmen China. For the most part, however, faith offered solace, support, and hopes in the private struggles of individuals. A Christianity with a public spirit and addressing common concerns has been a minority phenomenon in contemporary China, but it is one with outsized consequences. Public Christianity began to sprout among educated elites in the 1980s, even before the Tiananmen massacre. In a groundbreaking, influential work of cultural critique published in 1988, entitled Salvation and Carefree Wandering, 拯救与逍遥, Liu Xiaofeng, a young philosopher, argued that throughout Chinese history, the carefree wandering in ease and contentment had been the highest spiritual pursuit. The archetypal Chinese scholar official Qu Yuan had placed all his hopes in the, quote, politics of the kingly way, unquote, Wang Dao, or virtuous rule. Chinese intellectuals had turned to poetry and carefree wandering as a form of self-deliverance. Yet, quote, versification is no force in the fight against evil. It is only the art of coexisting with evil, unquote. The ultimate response to the crisis of China and of human existence must be a spiritual transcendence and a, quote, homecoming for the individual soul, which is only to be found in the Judeo-Christian spirit of salvation, unquote. To Liu Xiaofeng and other so-called cultural Christians of the 1980s and 1990s, Protestantism gives voice to the pains and hopes of the individual, long drawn out in the ecstasies of Mao's mass revolution. In the months leading up to the Tiananmen movement of 1989, a similar case for Christianity was made by Liu Xiaobo, no relation to Liu Xiaofeng, an irreverent essayist and literary critic and future Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Liu Xiaobo had broken out in the mid-1980s as a dark horse in the intellectual circle and was famous for his scathing scholarly rebuke of traditional moralistic Chinese culture, which he faulted for its stifling of individuality and for the, quote, withering rationalization and dogmatization of the life force, unquote. Liu Xiaobo's hero was St. Augustine. To him, Augustine revealed in the core of Western religious traditions the individual's, quote, consciousness of suffering and of evil, unquote, in opposition to collective consciousness long sanctioned by the totalitarian state. Reflecting on the moral failures of the Chinese people in general during the Cultural Revolution, when Mao turned them against one another and unleashed an unending purge of counter-revolutionaries and ideological deviants, Liu was dismayed at their incapacity for guilt and repentance. He noted that strangely, quote, once the Cultural Revolution ended, everyone in China became a victim and a hero in the fight against it, Chinese people have never possessed a genuine and willing spirit of repentance, always shifting blame and responsibility unto others while attributing success, honor, and truth to themselves, unquote. He concluded that godlessness had preconditioned the Chinese mind for this kind of moral disability. Quote, "The tragedy of the Chinese is the tragedy of a people without God. It is because the light from the other shore has disappeared that the darkness of this shore is mistaken for light. 因为彼岸的光芒消失，此岸的黑暗才被人误认为光明." Iconoclastic intellectuals such as Liu Xiaobo and Liu Xiaofeng, who began to appear on the national scene during the 1980s, often presented Christianity as a cure for China's cultural malaise. For them, Christianity, especially Protestantism, with its refreshing foreignness, provided a new idiom for individual consciousness, long stultified by mass political campaigns. It gave meaning to personal pain and suffering, helped make sense of the evil in this life, presented a credible moral compass, and offered hopes beyond the present world, while the official creed, Confucian or communist, had seemed preoccupied with the collective affairs of the Chinese society and with the worries of the ruler and his state. The Western faith breathed freedom, and it helped one bid an emphatic farewell to Maoism. After Tiananmen, scholarly exploration of Christianity continued to expand, often in the form of comparative cultural studies. In 1989, He Guanghu, a new PhD from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, orchestrated the launch of a new book series featuring dozens of translated Western books from the Christian tradition, along with a new scholarly journal called Christian Culture Review. Since then, He Guanghu has emerged as perhaps the most important theologian in contemporary China. Over the years, he has produced a steady stream of essays to offer Christian critiques of defects in Chinese traditional culture, such as accepting the ruler of the land as the quote-unquote son of heaven, a fatal mistaking of the profane for the sacred, which resulted in the modern deification of the political leader. He needed not mention Mao by name. He argued that all the revolutionary slogans promoting communist morality in China had failed because the remedies offered were entirely secular, and that only the Christian belief that God is the author of the moral law would be able to address China's moral maladies. Such a theology found ready echoes in the broader intellectual circle. In 1997, after reading Hans Kuhn's On Being a Christian, Liu Xiaobo wrote a reflective essay. He did that while he was in prison, actually, in which he admitted that although he may never become a member of an organized church, quote, Jesus Christ is the model of character for me, unquote. Since the turn of the century, a major arena in the Chinese public life where Christianity came into prominence has been rights defense through legal means, or weiquan, a phenomenon that followed the development of the legal profession in the post-Mao era. At the forefront of the rights defense movement have been Protestant legal scholars and lawyers who took advantage of the new availability of both legal means to seek redress for the wronged and the dawning of the age of the internet, which incidentally Liu Xiaobo called God's major gift for China. In May 2000, Fan Yafeng, a legal scholar and a recent convert, established the online public law review, 公法评论网, which publicized police misconduct and social injustice and discussed issues ranging from village elections and household registration to property rights and constitutional government. In 2006, after a high-profile legal defense of Cai Zhuohua, an independent pastor accused of illegal business practices for unauthorized printing of Christian literature, several Protestant legal activists formed the Christian Rights Defense Lawyers of China, 基督徒维权律师团, quoting Amos 5:24, "Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream," and Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. The new group's public announcement declared that its goal was to, quote, safeguard the rights of Chinese Christians to let love and righteousness prevail in China and to promote the rule of law in China, unquote. In 2008, the group compiled Rights Protection Handbook for Christians, the first such citizen handbook for protection against illegal acts of the state, and distributed 15,000 copies. Perhaps the story of Gao Zhisheng, one of the members of this group, can illustrate both the energy, the intensity, and resilience of Christian rights defense and the high price exacted for such contemporary attempts to drive a spoke into the wheels of injustice, to borrow the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Hailing from a background of desperate poverty in the hinterland province of Shanxi, and with only a middle school education, Gao Zhisheng studied law on his own in the 1990s, passed the stringent bar exam, moved to Beijing, and established a law practice after winning well-known personal injury lawsuits. Driven by his sympathies for the marginalized and powerless underclass to which his family had belonged, he embarked on the defense of persecuted religious followers, particularly the practitioners of the quasi-religious group called Falun Gong. Having worked closely with Christian legal activists, Gao converted to Christianity in 2005. "I am willing to live my whole life to glorify the Lord," he said in his prayer of commitment to the new faith on Thanksgiving Day in 2005. "I am willing to battle for love and justice in China," unquote. On the basis of his investigations while representing Falun Gong practitioners in cases of horrific police brutality, he posted online open letters to the CCP's General Secretary Hu Jintao and Premier Wen Jiabao, detailing nationwide persecutions of the Falun Gong individuals, including the incarceration of hundreds of thousands for re-education through labor, some 3,000 deaths in police custody, organ harvesting from prisoners still alive, as well as electric shocks to genitals and other forms of torture. In one such public letter a month after his conversion to Christianity, Gao renounced his party membership. Quote, "Effective immediately, I withdraw from this evil party, which is devoid of benevolence, righteousness, and inhumanity," unquote. He added, "This is the proudest day in my life." Retaliation predictably followed. Gao's lawyer license was suspended in August 2006. Swarms of plainclothes police constantly harassed him and his family. Gao himself was also forcibly disappeared. In December, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison with a 5-year reprieve for, quote, "inciting subversion of state power," unquote. As it turned out, the 5-year reprieve quickly descended into repeated forced disappearances, into police custody in secret locations, during which Gao himself underwent extreme and grotesque forms of torture, beyond beating and sleep deprivation. His captors urinated on his face, smoked his eyes and nose, applied electric shock and toothpicks to his genital, and for months kept him in a cramped, unventilated basement, during which, on days of suffocating humidity and heat, the guards watching him on their 2-hour rotations, 2-hour shifts, repeatedly threw up. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Gao cited Romans as he recounted his persecution. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light to seek through suffering and endurance our way of light, that glorious way which manifests the principles of heaven on this land of China, he wrote. You'll notice that he apparently coaxed the biblical passage about spiritual warfare to support his earthly battles for justice. In Gao's own account, God had been with him and had answered his prayers in the depth of his ordeal, and had granted him mystic experience amid his tribulations. He wrote, "Most of the time, I don't pray to God for my own specific interest, but before going to sleep each night and before getting up each morning, I always pray earnestly for a civilized future of our country and our nation. In moments of major decisions, all my prayers have been answered definitely within the last 5 seconds before I woke up the next morning." On one of those occasions, Yu Hongyuan, a senior official of the Beijing Bureau of Public Security, came to Gao's secret detention place and offered him the choice of either being sent into exile in the West or being kept, quote, isolated from the world indefinitely to make your life worse than death, unquote. Praying that night, quote, I asked God to forgive the weaknesses in my life. If God would permit, I was ready to leave the country to avoid misfortune. If not, I would not hesitate to stay, unquote. The next morning, seconds before he awoke, he dreamed of a huge blackboard filled with thousands of words. At the center was the large Chinese character Ming, people, circled with chalk, which was connected with dotted lines to another character, the same Ming, people, at the upper edge of the blackboard, also circled with chalk. Quote, that same day, I declined the offer to be sent into exile, unquote. In December 2007, ahead of the Beijing Olympics and during a brief period of relative freedom, Gao penned an open letter to members of the US Congress, telling them that while as a Chinese citizen he loved his country and thirsted for a chance for China to host the Olympic Games, holding the Olympics in the midst of rampant human rights abuse, quote, pierced my conscience and sense of justice, unquote. He urged the international community to direct its attention to the ongoing humanitarian crisis, disaster in China, including the bloody crackdown on religious communities, the forcible demolition of countless homes of the poor, the brutal treatment of petitioners for redress, the detention and barbaric torture of human rights lawyers, and myriad forms of state plunder of private property. He had read James Madison's 600-page notes of debates in the Federal Convention of 1787 twice during the previous 2 months, he told them. Quoting the grand historian Sima Qian, Gao wrote that a free, democratic, and constitutional China, like the country that Madison was witnessing being birthed in America, quote, though it is beyond my reach, My heart yearns for it, unquote. For Gao, America had remained a beacon of democracy and the source of moral inspiration since the time of Madison. Quote, Dr. Martin Luther King once said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, unquote. The Chinese Communist Party, quote, has turned that logic upside down so that justice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere, unquote, he explained. What brings hope is that the pursuit of religious faith in China was facilitating a, quote, moral reconstruction. The peaceful civil disobedience of faith communities was facilitating a peaceful transition to a democratic future. May God bless America, and may the light of freedom soon shine upon the land of China, unquote. In December 2011, near the end of the 5-year reprieve of his 2006 sentence, and after repeated forced disappearances, Gao was sent back to prison to serve his 3-year sentence, a news greeted with much relief on the part of his family, given the lesser likelihood of torture inside a regular prison. In August 2014, after his release from a prison in Akasu Prefecture in Xinjiang, Gao was placed under confinement in his family's cave dwelling in his hometown in Jia County, Shanxi Province. Going against the pleading of his family to stop writing, he completed the handwritten manuscript of a book entitled The Year 2017, Rise Up, China, published in Taiwan in 2016, in which he detailed the police harassment and the repeated torture he experienced over the years, and pronounced a revelation he claimed to have received from God, that the demise of the Chinese Communist Party would happen in 2017. On August 13, 2017, while under guard, Gao disappeared once again and has not been heard again since. Beginning in the early 2000s, the emergence of Christian artistic and literary works has marked another prominent way in which Christianity has entered the public space in China. Essayist Yu Jie and novelist Bei Cun, for example, found Christian inspirations for their cultural iconoclasm and for their literary search for moral redemption of Chinese society. Independent filmmakers Hu Jie and Ai Xiaoming used documentary films to confront the atrocities of the state, the CCP state, past and present, and to expose, in the words of Hu Jie, quote, the evil within human nature in the radiant light of God, unquote. In the artistic world, the works of Daozi provide some of the most striking examples of the role of Christian faith and the rise of daring, innovative, and invariably subversive contemporary Chinese art that gives expression to the individual's free spirit, to remembrance of martyrdom, and to the search for transcendence. Daozi called his paintings sacred ink wash, 圣水墨, which captured a dominant mood in Christian art in contemporary China. So this is hymn of praise to the Lamb, saving grace. In one of them, the sorrowful Christ, a pensive, mournful Jesus, gazes as if at the desolation of a withering winter filled with human suffering. In another, the magnificent crown reminds us again of Jesus grieving for the people of Zion. 岛子内王明 was born in 1957 in Qingdao. His father was labeled a historical counter-revolutionary and was condemned to re-education through labor. Daozi grew up, in his own words, quote, under the cruel political oppression and discrimination of class struggle, unquote. After finishing middle school, he tried to make a living in Beidahuang, the Great Northern Wilderness, working successfully in lumbering, in a coal mine, and in a brick kiln. In 1979, he was admitted to Northwestern University in Xi'an. In his college years, he found his rebellious path in poetry, translating American confessional poems, and also dabbling in quote-unquote misty poetry, 朦胧诗 himself. In the late 80s, he studied modern Western literary and art theory in a master's program at Beijing Normal University. He was in Beijing when the Tiananmen democracy movement broke out, quote, a painful soul awakening prelude, unquote, to his conversion to Christianity. Quote, literature turns out to be so fragile, he wrote, unquote, in the face of raw power on display during the massacre. Daozi received minor punishments for his role in the Tiananmen democracy movement. In the 1990s, he served as editor of an independent liberal journal in Shenzhen before being appointed to a faculty position at Sichuan Fine Arts Institute in Chongqing. At the start of an academic career that eventually in 2002 would take him to Beijing, where he became a professor of art theory and history in the School of Art at Tsinghua University. During his sojourn in Sichuan, he befriended a fellow art critic named Zhao Changping, a recent Protestant convert and leader of a house church in Chengdu. Daozi became a Christian under his influence, and in 1998, he received baptism in an apartment bathtub outside Chengdu. His conversion capped a melancholy, years-long search for a sustaining faith. Amid his own disaffections after 1989, the fragility of literature was once again driven home to him by what befell his close friend Gu Cheng, one of the most celebrated mystic poets of the 1980s. Gu Cheng had penned the famous line, "Dark night has given me dark eyes, yet I use them to seek the light," unquote. In 1993 came the shocking news that Gu Cheng, who had emigrated to New Zealand, hanged himself after axing his wife to death in the abrupt finale of a once fiery romance lost to the poet's infidelity and jealousy. Quote, our generation has been estranged from grace since birth, unquote. Daozi reflected upon Gu's death. Quote, although we have been thoroughly washed in blood and tears, we've never received the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Instead, we live within an illusory realm of self-absorption, unquote. Over the years, in Daozi's own restless search for light, he has sought out a senior abbot at a Taoist White Cloud Temple in Beijing, but concluded in the end that Taoism, as a world-renouncing religion, offered no solution to the baffling problems of his life. For him, conversion to Christianity enabled a new way to confront those problems, and also inspired a new artistic adventure in the mid-2000s, a kind of ink wash painting he called 圣水墨, often drawn on biblical narratives and centered on the themes of lament and redemption. In 2011 to 2012, Daozi had the first traveling exhibitions of his paintings in Germany, Hong Kong, and in Beijing, one of them called Elegies and Hymns. Some of the paintings, such as the 2007 work, Prophet, that you see here, employed varying shades of the traditional black ink to convey a, quote, sense of solemnity and sanctity and an imagery of suffering and redemption, unquote. In his words, quote, the elegies with their black and white cadence in sorrow, lament, or as requiems, all for the martyrs, for the saintly Lingzhao, for an innocent land enduring suffering like a Gregorian chant. Another group of Daozi's works made lavish use of blue, dark red, and gold, often as symbols of, respectively, sorrow, sacrifice, redemption, and the divine. Among the recurring motifs in his paintings are the crucifixion, angels, the bitter bamboo in the shade of a cross, which gives a new twist and a new meaning to its traditional symbolism. Another motif is martyrdom of Lin Zhao, and after Liu Xiaobo's death in 2017, the late Nobel Peace Laureate. During Lin Zhao's last days in prison before her execution, there was a rubber hood that was placed over her head just to make sure that, just to muffle her voice. So this is on the left side, you see a rendering of that. The triptych, Thunder, Lightning, and Candlelight, captures the alleged sudden storm in Beijing on the night of July 13, 2017, the day Liu Xiaobo died while serving his 11-year sentence for inciting subversion of state power. It was a legendary scene of heavenly grief. To seek inspirations for a new painting, Daozi would light candles and go into a prayer meditation, which often led to the imagery he wanted to create. He called it, quote, a search for the lost imagery of eternity and for an aesthetic of redemption, unquote. Jesus, he said, was the poet for the soul. As China entered the 21st century, especially the Xi Jinping era, new lines of Christ-inspired poetry have emerged in the form of political dissent in defense of human freedom, social justice, and democracy, often at the personal cost that is difficult to understand. Zhu Yufu, whose advocacy for democracy started in the late 1970s and who converted to Christianity in 2009, penned a 12-line poem entitled It Is Time, 是时候了, at the time of the Arab Spring of 2011, calling on Chinese people to, quote, step into the square and to voice the song in your hearts. For that, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, 7 months for each line. Christian lawyer Tang Jinling, who, like Gao Zhisheng, lost his license in 2005 for his involvement in rights defense, started a, quote, civil non-cooperation movement, unquote, in 2006, organizing a ballot redemption campaign to boycott the staged local elections for the People's Congress, in which the results were preordained. For that, and for launching the so-called Lingzhao Commemoration Day to pay homage to the martyr of the Mao era, he was arrested in 2014 and received a 5-year sentence. Yet another prominent Protestant human rights lawyer, Li Baiguang, who was repeatedly harassed, kidnapped, and beaten for his defense of farmers in cases of illegal land expropriations, died a mysterious, sudden death in 2018. In February 2020, at the start of COVID-19, 36-year-old Zhang Zhan, Another recent convert and a former Shanghai lawyer who had been fired for refusing to falsify financial records and who had lost her license for criticizing new restrictions on law practice, went to Wuhan as a citizen journalist to report on the spread of the pandemic and on the extent of human suffering and in the city under lockdown. She saw it as her Christian duty to, quote, seek truth and seek it at all cost, unquote. Defying the state media's cover-up of the unchecked spread of the virus, she posted 122 video clips of hospital wards and morgues and police violence in their enforcement of the lockdown on YouTube. For that, she was arrested and sentenced to 4 years in prison for picking quarrels and provoking trouble. That's the charge. Released in May of 2024, she was rearrested that August and sent back to prison for another 4 years. So she's now back in prison, charged with the same crime for supporting a fellow dissident whom she had converted. During the brief 3 months she was free. Zhang Zhang is silenced for now, but there's no indication that the Christian-inspired search for a more just society in China has stalled, or that the prophetic and subversive cultural voice of contemporary Chinese Christianity has been lost. In conclusion, a few observations can be made about the rise of public Christianity in our time. First, Christianity has maintained its appeal as a faith that affirms the worth, dignity, freedom, and inherent rights of the individual in a society that had for decades subjected all to the will and whim of the party state. Number two, it has provided transcendent values and a convincing moral compass to replace the one long supplied by a revolutionary ideology now discarded. Three, with its ties to Western democracy, it has inspired visions of a future democratic China. And four, something that for lack of time I have not discussed, namely, the Church has mobilized social and humanitarian services, especially in times of crisis, such as the Sichuan earthquake in 2008, that often had the Church's services often have more credibility than those that the state offered. It is also notable that almost every one of the public Christian figures is a first-generation recent convert, often with haphazard ties to the Church. In its various forms and arising out of distinct circumstances and individual stories, public Christianity in contemporary China has nevertheless gravitated almost invariably toward political dissent. The dissonance between the political reality and the ideals of justice and human freedom that Christianity presents to the socially minded and morally empowered converts has pulled individuals, one after another, toward radiant hopes and noble failure. In traditional and even revolutionary China, Confucian sensibilities has also generated heroic acts of noble failure in various acts of loyal remonstrance, but all within a cosmology in which the ruler and the ruled, master and servant, moved in the same moral orbit. For that reason, many of the prominent revolutionary intellectuals purged and abused during the long Mao years remain steadfast communists, attributing their persecution and personal disgrace to the ferocity of Mao's ideological hounds. They greeted their political rehabilitations after Mao's death with expected gratitude. Some of them returned their recovered compensations in the form of overzealous party dues. In contrast, in contemporary China, Christianity has hastened an exit from the moral orbit, from that moral orbit, and has denied the ruler the traditional assurance that in the end, the rebels who have not been killed will prostrate themselves once again to receive amnesty, granted through a magnanimous imperial decree of pacification, 诏安. Quote, governing by virtue is like the noble star, is like the North Star, taking its place in the sky, Confucius has said, all the other stars will revolve around it, unquote. During the Mao years, communism had been that star. In our time, for many Chinese, Christianity has become the new polar star. Or to borrow Liu Xiaobo's phrase, it has become the light from the other shore, which beckons the suffering multitude to cross over to the land of redemption. Thank you.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu Copyright 2026 The President and Fellows of Harvard College